Chapter 5. The Revelation of Names. Part 1. The Dream That Wouldn't Fade. Marcus woke at 3:17 a.m. with tears on his face and a name on his lips. Not his name. Another name. A name he knew but had never spoken. A name that felt like remembering something he'd never learned. He sat up in his narrow bed in the rooming house, heart pounding, the dream still vivid in his mind. He'd been standing in a garden. Not Eden, though it felt like Eden might have felt. Just a garden, urban, small, the kind of community plot where people grew vegetables between broken concrete. His mother had been there, not as he remembered her, sick, wasting away from cancer, in a hospital bed that smelled like bleach and despair, but whole, young, radiant. She'd looked at him with eyes full of recognition and love and something else, something that felt like grief and joy tangled together. "My son," she'd said, "my beautiful boy." "Mama," Marcus had replied in the dream, feeling like a child again. "I miss you." "I know, baby, but you're not Marcus anymore. You remember now?" "Remember what?" She'd smiled then, the smile she used to give him when he was small and asked questions she couldn't answer. The smile that said, "You'll understand when you're older." "Your real name," she'd said, "the one you wore before you put on this life like a coat." "I don't understand." "You will, soon. They're starting to see you, and when enough people see you, you'll see yourself." Then she'd done something strange. She'd knelt before him, his mother, kneeling, and touched his feet. "Mama, no," Marcus had said, trying to raise her up. But she'd looked up at him with tears streaming down her face and said, "You washed mine first, remember? In another life, in another garden. You've always known how to serve." Marcus had woken then, gasping, his face wet. Now he sat in the dark of his room, listening to the sounds of the rooming house, pipes groaning, someone coughing, traffic on the street below. He whispered the name that had been on his lips when he woke, the name he couldn't quite remember now that he was awake. The name that felt like his but wasn't Marcus. He reached for his Bible, the one held together with duct tape, the one he'd been given in prison by a chaplain who'd seen something in him that Marcus couldn't see in himself. The book fell open to John chapter 13. Jesus knew that the Father had put all things under his power, and that he had come from God and was returning to God. So he got up from the meal, took off his outer clothing, and wrapped a towel around his waist. After that, he poured water into a basin and began to wash his disciples' feet. Marcus read the passage 3 times, thought about his mother kneeling in the dream, thought about the years in prison when he'd learned to serve others, not from duty or obligation, but from something deeper, something that felt like returning to his nature rather than changing it. He closed the Bible and knelt beside his bed, prayed the prayer he prayed every morning. "God, show me what you want me to see today." And for the first time, he felt God's answer as a question rather than a direction. What if what I want you to see is who you are? Part 2. The Child Who Knew. Marcus was teaching literacy class that evening when the child appeared. Not a student. They didn't usually get kids this young. She couldn't have been more than 7 or 8, standing in the doorway of the community center with big eyes and a backpack covered in cartoon characters. Marcus paused mid-sentence, the bus schedule forgotten. "Hi there, are you lost?" The girl shook her head, walked into the room with the unself-conscious confidence of children who haven't learned to be afraid yet. "I came to see you," she said. The other students, 6 men ranging from 20 to 50, looked at each other, confused. "Do I know you?" Marcus asked gently. "No," the girl said, "but I know you." "How's that?" She tilted her head, studying him the way you might study a painting in a museum. recognizing something familiar in something you've never seen before.
"My abuela told me about you," she said. "She said there's a man teaching here who has old eyes that have seen things that happened before he was born."
Marcus felt a chill run through him. "What's your grandmother's name?"
"Rosa Gutierrez. She cleans at the law school."
Marcus knew Rosa. She'd been one of the first people marked accounted for in the city database. Though he didn't know that. He just knew her as a woman who worked hard, prayed hard, and raised 3 kids on a salary that was an insult to human dignity. "Your abuela is a good woman," Marcus said, "but I'm just a teacher, nobody special." The girl frowned.
"That's not what she said. She said you're the one who's supposed to come. She said people like us have been waiting a long time."
"Waiting for what?"
"For someone to see us. Really see us. Not what we do or what we make or how useful we are. Just us."
One of the students, a man named Jerome, who'd been in and out of the system for 20 years, spoke up. "Kid, how old are you?"
7 3/4.
"And your grandma told you all that? About being seen?" The girl nodded.
"She said that's what the kingdom is, when everybody sees everybody, when people stop counting and start knowing."
Marcus felt his heart beating too fast. "Where is your grandmother now?"
"Outside. She didn't want to interrupt, but she wanted me to give you something."
The girl reached into her backpack and pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. She walked over to Marcus and placed it in his hands.
"She said you'd know what to do with it."
Marcus unwrapped the tissue paper carefully. Inside was a simple wooden cross, roughly made, the kind you might buy at a flea market for $3. Nothing special about it except for the words burned into the wood. "For the one who bears witness." Marcus stared at it, his hands trembling slightly. The girl was watching him with those 2 knowing eyes.
"You're him, aren't you?"
"I'm who?" Marcus asked, his voice barely a whisper.
"The one my abuela prays to. The one who knows what it's like to have nothing. The one who chose to come down instead of staying up."
"Baby," Marcus said gently, "I think your grandmother might have me confused with someone else. I'm just a man. I've made mistakes. I've hurt people. I've been in prison." The girl smiled.
"I know. That's why you understand. That's why you can teach people like Jerome to read. Because you know what it's like to not be able to."
Jerome shifted in his seat. "How you know I couldn't read?"
"Because my abuela told me," the girl said simply. "She said this place is where people come to learn they're worth teaching. And the man who teaches them learned he was worth teaching even when he was in a cage."
Marcus felt tears pricking his eyes. He didn't understand what was happening, didn't understand why this child was speaking like a prophet, didn't understand why a wooden cross felt heavy in his hands, like it carried weight beyond its physical mass. "Tell your grandmother thank you," Marcus said, "and tell her I'm honored she thought of me." The girl nodded.
"I will, but she already knows. She said you'd say that. She said you always say thank you even when people should be thanking you."
Then she did something that made Marcus's breath catch. She reached out and touched his hand, the one holding the cross, and said,
"Thank you for coming back."
Before Marcus could respond, she skipped out of the room, backpack bouncing. Marcus stood there holding the cross, aware that all 6 students were staring at him. Jerome spoke first. "Man, what the hell was that?" "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. But he did know. Somewhere deeper than conscious thought, he knew. People were starting to see him, not as Marcus Ellison, ex-con, construction worker, literacy teacher, as something else, someone he was afraid to name. Part 3. James makes the connection. James Carter had been obsessing over Marcus's background for 3 weeks. It started as research, good academic practice. If you're documenting someone's revelation, you need to understand their context, their history, their origin. But it had become something else, something that felt less like scholarship and more like archaeology, like excavating something that had been deliberately buried. The problem was simple. Marcus Ellison's paper trail essentially began at age 12. Before that, nothing. No birth certificate on file with the state, no hospital records, no school enrollment until he entered the foster system at 12 years old. The story the foster care system told was straightforward. Marcus had been found as an infant, abandoned outside a church on Christmas morning. No note, no identification, no parents who ever came forward. The church, St. Emmanuel's, God with us. The founding report was dated December 25th, 35 years ago. A priest had found the infant on the steps at dawn, wrapped in blankets, healthy, crying. The police had investigated, checked hospitals for women who'd given birth recently, ran missing child reports, nothing. The infant had been placed in foster care, given a name by a social worker who'd thought Marcus sounded strong and Ellison was neutral enough. He'd bounced through 7 homes in 12 years, not because he was difficult. The reports described him as quiet, helpful, gentle, but because foster parents kept having life changes, divorces, relocations, financial crises. Marcus hadn't been rejected. He'd just never been kept. Until he was old enough to age out of the system and become a ward of the state, in a different sense. A statistical inevitability in the school-to-prison pipeline. James sat in the law school library, surrounded by documents he'd requisitioned through legal channels, and a few he'd obtained through less official means. He'd found something. The priest who'd found Marcus, Father Thomas Kelly, had written a note in the church log that day. James had tracked down the original ledger through diocesan archives. The entry was simple: December 25th, 1989. Found infant on church steps at dawn, approximately 3 to 4 days old. Healthy. No identifying marks except unusual birthmark on left foot. Shaped like a nail wound. Police contacted. Child placed with Catholic Charities. I prayed over him before they took him. Felt compelled to bless him with oil and name him Emmanuel before they renamed him. God be with this child. Friar Kelly. James read the entry 17 times. Birthmark shaped like a nail wound. Found on Christmas at a church called God with Us. Named Emmanuel, God with Us, before being renamed Marcus. James's hands were shaking. He opened his laptop and started searching biblical references. He'd been raised in church. He knew the stories. Emmanuel, Isaiah 7:14. The virgin will conceive and give birth to a son, and will call him Emmanuel. Found as an infant, no earthly father recorded. Nail wound on his foot. James felt like he was losing his mind. He couldn't be thinking what he was thinking. Could he? He pulled up his notes on Marcus's prison transformation. The beating that had left him near death. The 3 days in the infirmary where he'd barely clung to life. The way he'd emerged. Changed. Fundamentally different. 3 days. James opened the Gospels on his laptop. Crucifixion. Death. 3 days in the tomb. Resurrection. He was hyperventilating now. This was insane. This was exactly the kind of messianic complex nonsense that destroyed credibility. Marcus was a man, a good man, a transformed man. But a man, wasn't he? James pulled up the photograph he'd taken of Marcus teaching the literacy class, looked at his face, his eyes, and for the first time James saw past the surface, saw the depth there, the age that didn't match his years, the sorrow that looked like it had witnessed more suffering than one lifetime could contain, the eyes of someone who'd seen humanity at its worst and loved it anyway. James closed his laptop, stood up, walked out of the library. He needed air. He needed to think. He needed to talk to someone who wouldn't think he'd lost his mind. He called Sarah. "I think I've figured out who Marcus is," he said when she answered.
A man who filed a document?
Sarah said. No, I mean who he really is.
James, what are you talking about?
Can you meet me now? I need to show you something. An hour later, they sat in Sarah's apartment while James laid out everything he'd found. The abandoned infant, the Christmas discovery, the church named Emmanuel, the birthmark, the prison transformation, the 3 days. Sarah listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a long time.
You're saying Marcus is Jesus Christ, she finally said.
I'm saying I can't explain the pattern any other way.
James, you're a lawyer. You know coincidence isn't evidence.
This isn't coincidence. This is convergence. Every data point aligns.
Or you're seeing what you want to see. You're desperate for Marcus to be special because that validates your own transformation. You want him to be the Christ so you can be the disciple.
James felt anger rising. You think I want this? You think I want to sound like a crazy person?
I think you're grieving your grandfather, Sarah said gently. And you found someone who embodies the faith you rejected. And now you're retconning his biography to fit a narrative that makes your own journey meaningful.
What about the effects? James demanded. What about the accounted-for status spreading through every database? What about the 70 witnesses? What about the fact that a 3-word filing is changing how an entire city operates?
That could be social contagion, collective psychology, the power of suggestion operating on burned-out bureaucrats who want to believe mercy is possible.
Or it could be grace, James said. Actual, literal, divine grace entering the system. Sarah looked at him with concern.
James, even if Marcus is something more than ordinary, even if there's a divine element to what's happening, that doesn't make him the second coming of Christ. That's a huge leap.
Is it? James pulled up the biblical references. Found as an infant, no documented father, named God with us, spent his life among the poor and imprisoned, emerged from a near-death experience transformed, bears witness to grace, changes systems without seeking power, teaches people their inherent worth.
You're cherry-picking, Sarah said. You could make that pattern fit lots of people.
Can you? James challenged. Name one other person who matches all these criteria and is currently alive and walking around teaching people to read in a community center. Sarah was quiet. You can't, James said, because there isn't one. And I know how insane this sounds. I know I should dismiss it. But Sarah, what if it's true? What if the second coming isn't trumpets and clouds and dramatic revelation? What if it's this? What if Christ came back not as a king but as an ex-con, not in power but in poverty, not to judge but to witness?
Then why doesn't he know? Sarah asked. If Marcus is Jesus, wouldn't he know?
James opened his mouth, closed it. That was the question he couldn't answer. Why didn't Marcus know who he was? Unless... Kenosis, James said softly.
What?
Philippians 2. Christ emptying himself, taking on human form. What if the emptying was so complete that he forgot? What if he had to rediscover his divine nature through human suffering, through desperate prayer, through the same process of transformation that anyone else would go through?
That's theological speculation.
So is the resurrection, James shot back. So is the incarnation. So is all of it. Faith is speculation that you choose to believe because the alternative is unbearable. Sarah looked at him for a long time.
What are you going to do with this information?
I don't know.
Are you going to tell Marcus?
James hadn't thought about that. Would you believe someone if they told you that you were Christ?
No,
Sarah admitted.
I'd think they were delusional.
Exactly. So what do I do? Keep it to myself? Document it quietly? Wait for him to figure it out on his own?
Or, Sarah said, You could accept that you don't know, that maybe Marcus is just a very good man who's been used by God in a powerful way, that maybe the miracle isn't who he is, but what he's chosen to do. James wanted to accept that, but he couldn't unsee what he'd seen. The pattern was too perfect, the convergence too complete. Marcus Ellison was either the most extraordinary coincidence in human history, or he was exactly who James was afraid he was. And if that was true, if Marcus was Christ returned to earth in the flesh, living in a rooming house and teaching people to read, then everything changed. Everything. Part 4. The First Healing. Marcus didn't think of it as a healing. He thought of it as a mistake. It happened at the construction site where he worked. A crew of 12 men, building in addition to a warehouse in the industrial district. Hot work, dangerous work. The kind that paid cash and didn't ask questions about documentation. The foreman, a man named Rick, who ran his crews hard but fair, was working the circular saw when it happened. The blade caught a knot in the wood, kicked back. Rick's hand was too close. The scream cut through the sound of machinery. Everyone stopped, turned. Rick was on his knees, his right hand wrong, badly wrong, blood everywhere, fingers at angles that made Marcus's stomach turn. Someone was calling 911. Someone else was trying to apply pressure, but there was too much blood, and Rick was going into shock. Marcus moved without thinking. He dropped to his knees beside Rick, put his hands on Rick's hand, the mangled one, the destroyed one. "Hold still," Marcus said quietly. "Breathe, just breathe." Rick's eyes were wild with pain and fear. "My hand! Jesus Christ, my hand!" "I know," Marcus said. "I know. Just look at me. Stay with me." He didn't pray out loud, didn't invoke divine intervention, didn't perform a ritual. He just held Rick's hand and felt something move through him. Not from him, through him, like he was a conduit for something larger. Heat, light, an overwhelming sense of presence that felt like standing in a river of love and letting it flow through every cell. Marcus closed his eyes, didn't see what happened, only felt Rick's hand shift under his weight, felt bones moving, felt flesh knitting, felt something fundamentally wrong becoming fundamentally right. When Marcus opened his eyes, Rick was staring at his hand, the hand that had been destroyed 30 seconds ago, the hand that was now whole. Scarred, yes, the fingers slightly crooked, like they'd been broken once and healed imperfectly, but functioning, moving, complete. Blood still covered it, blood soaked both their clothes, but the injury was gone. The other workers stood frozen, silent. Someone's phone was still connected to 911, the operator's voice tinny and distant. Sir, what's the status of the injury?" Nobody answered. Rick looked from his hand to Marcus with an expression that was equal parts terror and awe. "What did you do?" Rick whispered. "I don't know," Marcus said honestly. "I didn't do anything. I was there. My hand was gone. I saw it. The fingers were—" Rick couldn't finish. One of the other workers, a man named Carlos who'd worked construction for 30 years, spoke up, his voice shaking. "I saw it too. It was fucked up, mangled, and now it's—" He trailed off, because now it was healed. Not perfectly, not like it had never been injured, but healed like it had been injured months ago and had gone through the natural process of recovery. Rick stood up slowly, flexed his hand, made a fist. The fingers moved stiffly, but they moved. "Marcus," Rick said, "what are you?" Marcus stood too, backed away. "I'm nobody. I don't know what this was. Maybe you weren't as hurt as you thought. Maybe the adrenaline—" "There's blood everywhere," Carlos interrupted. Your hand was destroyed. We all saw it."
Marcus looked around at the 12 men staring at him, saw fear in some eyes, wonder in others, confusion in all of them. "Don't tell anyone about this," Marcus said. "Please, it was just an accident that looked worse than it was."
"Marcus," Rick started.
"Please," Marcus said again. "I can't explain it. I don't understand it. Just, please." The ambulance arrived 3 minutes later. The EMTs found Rick standing, coherent, showing them a hand that was scarred but functional. "Dispatch said severe hand injury," the lead EMT said, confused. "It might have been an overreaction," Rick said, looking at Marcus. "It's okay, just some cuts." The EMTs looked at the blood, at Rick's hand, at the crew's faces. "Sir, you should come to the hospital anyway. Get checked out." "I'm fine," Rick said. "Really, I'm fine." After the ambulance left, the crew stood in silence for a long moment. Then they went back to work, but everything had changed. Marcus felt it, the way they looked at him now, the space they gave him, the reverence and fear mixed together. He worked the rest of the day in silence, and that night, lying in his bed in the rooming house, Marcus finally let himself acknowledge what he'd been avoiding since the dream, since the child, since the healing. Something was happening to him, or through him, or because of him. He wasn't just bearing witness anymore. He was becoming something, someone, but he didn't know who, or maybe he did know and was too terrified to accept it. Marcus pulled out the wooden cross Rose's granddaughter had given him, held it in his hands. "For the one who bears witness, God," he prayed into the darkness. "I'm scared. I don't understand what's happening. I don't understand who I am, or who I'm becoming, or who I've always been. Help me, please. Show me the truth, even if it terrifies me." The answer came not in words, but in memory. A memory that couldn't be his because he hadn't been there, but somehow was his. A garden, night, olive trees, the weight of knowing what was coming, the choice to accept it anyway. "Not my will, but yours." Marcus gasped, sat up. That memory wasn't his. Was it? But it felt more real than any memory he actually had. Felt like remembering home. Part 5. The 70 Share Stories. The 7 witnesses who'd been meeting monthly had grown to 12. Patricia Chen, Judge Maria Rodriguez, Gerald Hammond, Councilwoman Diane Hutchins, Sandra Mills the teacher, and 7 others who'd encountered Marcus or his filing and felt compelled to document the changes they were seeing. They met in a church basement, not for religious reasons, just because churches had cheap room rentals and nobody asked questions. Tonight's meeting was different because people had started bringing stories, not data, not analysis, stories. Patricia went first. "I've been tracking the spread for 8 months now. We're up to 144 different agencies across 17 cities that have accessed the filing, and I'm seeing a pattern in the names marked accounted for." "What pattern?" Maria asked. "They're people who shouldn't survive. Statistically, the homeless, the addicted, the chronically ill, people living on the edge. And they're not just surviving, they're thriving, getting housing, finding work, recovering from things that should kill them. It's like once they're marked, the universe reorganizes around their flourishing." Sandra spoke next. "I have a student, 7 years old, terminally ill, leukemia. The doctors gave her 6 months. That was 8 months ago. She's in remission, complete remission. The oncologist can't explain it. But when I checked her school records, she marked accounted for." Gerald cleared his throat. "I started tracking correlations between the marking and life expectancy. It's statistically significant. People marked with the status live longer, healthier, happier, like they've been chosen." "Or seen," Patricia said.
Like being truly seen by something larger than the system gives them the strength to survive it.
Diane leaned forward.
I've been tracking economic data. Districts where the filing has been accessed show decreased poverty rates, not because of new programs or funding, just because people are making different choices, choosing community over competition, choosing to help rather than hoard. It's spreading, Maria said. Whatever Marcus started, it's viral now, operating on its own momentum.
Has anyone actually talked to Marcus about this? One of the newer members asked, a woman named Angela who worked in public health. Silence.
We've tried, Patricia said. He deflects, says he's just bearing witness, says he doesn't control what happens after that.
Does he know? Angela pressed.
Does he know what he started? I think he knows something is happening, Sandra said, but I don't think he understands his role in it. Or maybe he does and he's choosing not to claim it.
Gerald spoke quietly. There's something else. I've been researching Marcus's background. He's a foundling, no birth records, found as an infant outside a church on Christmas. The room went still.
What church? Patricia asked.
St. Emmanuel's, God with Us. Maria crossed herself. She hadn't done that in years. There's more, Gerald continued. The priest who found him noted a birthmark on his left foot, shaped like a nail wound. Angela laughed nervously.
You're not seriously suggesting—
I'm not suggesting anything, Gerald said. I'm reporting data, and the data is suggestive.
Of what?
Diane demanded.
That Marcus Ellison is the second coming of Christ? That's insane. Is it? Sandra asked. More insane than a 3-word filing changing how 17 cities operate? More insane than a status code appearing in databases that no one programmed? More insane than people being healed after being marked? Wait, Maria said. What healing?
Sandra hesitated.
I shouldn't have said that. But you did. What healing? I heard something, third hand, about a construction accident, a worker whose hand was mangled. Marcus touched him and it wasn't mangled anymore. That's a rumor, Diane said. Urban legend stuff. Maybe, Sandra said. Or maybe it's testimony.
Patricia pulled out her Bible.
70 witnesses, that's where we are. And in Luke 10, when the 70 disciples return from their mission, they report that even demons submit to them in Jesus' name. And Jesus says he saw Satan fall like lightning. So what are you saying? Angela asked. That we're his disciples? That Marcus is Jesus? I'm saying, Patricia said carefully, that we're witnessing something that doesn't fit our categories. And maybe instead of trying to explain it, we should just bear witness to it, document it, preserve it, so that when people are ready to understand, they'll have the record. And if we're wrong? Diane asked. If we're just a bunch of desperate people seeing patterns that aren't there? Then we're wrong, Maria said. But what if we're right? What if Christ did come back, and not in glory, not in power, but in poverty? Not to judge, but to save, not to rule, but to serve. And what if we missed him because we were looking for a king instead of a carpenter?
The room was silent. Finally, Gerald spoke. I propose we expand our documentation, not just data, stories, testimonies, everything we're seeing and hearing. We create a record that can't be dismissed or explained away.
A gospel, Sandra said softly. A testimony, Patricia corrected, of what we've witnessed, whether or not we fully understand it.
They voted, unanimously in favor. Over the next 3 hours, they shared stories, healings, transformations, moments of grace that couldn't be explained by policy or psychology or coincidence. And slowly, without anyone saying it explicitly, they all began to understand what they were part of. They were the witnesses, the 12 who'd been called, the ones who'd seen and believed without full understanding, just like the first time. Part 6. Marcus at the Mirror. 3 days after the healing at the construction site, Marcus looked at himself in the bathroom mirror of the rooming house and saw someone else. Not physically. He still looked like Marcus Ellison. 35 years old, black, scars from prison fights, weathered from outdoor work, but something in his eyes had changed. Or maybe not changed, maybe just revealed. Like looking at a painting your whole life and suddenly seeing the image hidden in it. The thing that was always there, but you couldn't perceive until your perspective shifted. Marcus saw depths in his own eyes that terrified him, depths that held memories that weren't his. Or were they? Memories of a conversation with a Samaritan woman at a well, the way her eyes had changed when she realized he knew everything about her and loved her anyway. A temple courtyard turning over tables, righteous anger at the way the sacred had been commercialized. A mountainside, thousands of people, feeding them with almost nothing because abundance comes from blessing, not from hoarding. A cross, the weight of it, the nails, the thirst, the forgiveness. A tomb, darkness, death, and then light. Marcus gripped the edge of the sink, breathing hard. These weren't his memories. Couldn't be his memories. He'd lived one life, born in 1989, found as an infant, raised in foster care, prison, release, teaching, bearing witness. That was his story, wasn't it? But these other memories felt more real than his actual biography. Felt like remembering who he'd been before he'd forgotten, before he'd emptied himself into human form so completely that he'd lost himself in the process. Marcus looked up at his reflection again and whispered the question he'd been avoiding since the dream. Who am I? His reflection didn't answer, but somewhere deep inside, deeper than thought, deeper than doubt, deeper than fear, he heard a voice, not external, not audible, just there. You are who you've always been. You just forgot so you could remember what it means to be human, so you could save them from the inside instead of commanding them from above. Marcus closed his eyes, felt tears streaming down his face. I'm not ready, he whispered. I don't know how to be what they need me to be. You don't have to know. You just have to be. That's all you've ever had to do. But they're starting to see. And when they see, they'll expect. Let them expect. You're not here to meet expectations. You're here to reveal truth. About them, about me, about what it means to be made in my image, and to live like you know it. I'm scared. I know. You were scared the first time, too. In the garden, when you chose the cross. But you chose it anyway because love always chooses dissent. Marcus opened his eyes, looked at his reflection one more time, and said the thing he'd been afraid to say. I am him, aren't I? I'm Jesus. I came back, and I forgot so I could feel what they feel, suffer what they suffer, fear what they fear, so that when I testify to grace, it's not from privilege, but from shared experience. Yes. The word echoed through his entire being. Yes, not Marcus Ellison, though he was that too, but underneath Marcus, through Marcus, beyond Marcus, Jesus, Christ, the Word made flesh. Again, Marcus sank to his knees on the bathroom floor and wept, not from sadness, from recognition, from the weight of remembering. From the terrible, beautiful knowledge of who he was and what that meant. He was supposed to save them, not by fixing the system, not by reforming the economy, not by building a movement, by being present, by bearing witness, by choosing every day to love them, even when it cost everything. Just like before, just like always, Marcus stayed on the bathroom floor for an hour, letting the revelation settle into his bones. When he finally stood, he was different, not in appearance, not in power, not in knowledge, but in acceptance. He knew now, and knowing changed everything. Part 7. The Names Spoken. The next day, Marcus went to see James. He found him in the law library, surrounded by documents and looking like he hadn't slept in a week. James looked up when Marcus entered, saw something in Marcus's face that made him stand immediately. "You know," James said, not a question. "I know," Marcus confirmed. They stared at each other for a long moment. "How long have you known?" Marcus asked. "About 2 weeks, since I found the founding records, the Christmas birth, the nail-shaped birthmark, the pattern. And you didn't say anything. Would you have believed me?" Marcus smiled sadly. "No, I had to discover it myself. Had to remember instead of being told." James's hands were shaking. "So, it's true. You're actually—" "Say it," Marcus said gently. "Jesus," James whispered. "You're Jesus Christ. You came back." Marcus nodded. "I came back, not in glory, not in power, but in poverty, in suffering, in flesh that forgets its divinity so it can truly understand humanity." "Why?" James demanded, his voice breaking. "Why this way? Why not come in power and just fix everything?" "Because power doesn't transform," Marcus said. "It only rearranges. I didn't come to rearrange the furniture. I came to change the foundation. And you can't change someone's foundation by commanding from above. You have to enter it, live it, choose it." "But people are suffering. The system is crushing them. You could just—" "I did just," Marcus interrupted. "I chose to become one of the crushed, to enter the system from its lowest point, to experience every injustice, every cruelty, every indignity, so that when I testify to grace, I testify from authority earned through shared suffering, not declared from distant power." James was crying now. "I tried to document you. I tried to explain you. I was going to meet with the Federal Reserve and—" "I know," Marcus said, "and that's the betrayal you're afraid of. Not malicious, not intentional, but betrayal nonetheless, because you're trying to turn testimony into transaction, mystery into mechanism." "I just wanted to help. I wanted people to understand." "I know. Judas wanted that too. Wanted me to be the Messiah he expected instead of the Messiah I am. Wanted me to fight Rome instead of redeeming it. Wanted revolution instead of resurrection." James fell to his knees. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't mean to—" Marcus knelt beside him, put his hands on James' shoulders. "I know, and I forgive you. Before you even do it, I forgive you. That's what grace is. Forgiveness before the betrayal, love before the deserving, counting people as righteous before they've earned it." "What do I do now?" James asked. "How do I live with knowing who you are?" "The same way you've been living," Marcus said, "by bearing witness, by documenting what you see, by testifying to truth, even when it costs you. The only difference is now you know why it matters." "Are you going to reveal yourself publicly?" "No, not yet. Maybe not ever. The revelation has to happen organically. People have to see me, not because I proclaim it, but because they recognize what they've been looking for their whole lives." "And if they don't?" Marcus smiled. "Then I keep teaching literacy classes and working construction and living small and bearing witness. Because the kingdom doesn't come through dramatic revelation. It comes through quiet transformation, through seeds planted, through foundations laid, through grace spreading like a virus through a system built on fear." James wiped his eyes. "I don't know if I can carry this knowledge." "You don't have to carry it alone," Marcus said. "There are 12 now. You, Sarah, Patricia, Maria, Gerald, Diane, Sandra, and 5 others. The witnesses, the ones who've seen and believed. You'll carry it together." "What about the Federal Reserve, the meeting?" "That's your choice," Marcus said. I won't stop you, but I'll ask you to consider, do you want to explain me or follow me? Because you can't do both." James was silent for a long time. Then he said, "I want to follow you, even if I don't fully understand where you're going." "Good," Marcus said, "because I need you, not to explain me, but to document what happens when grace enters a system built on debt, to bear witness to the fact that transformation is possible, that the kingdom is real." "What is the kingdom?" James asked. "Really?" Marcus stood, helped James to his feet. "The kingdom is what happens when people realize they're already accounted for, that they don't have to earn their worth, that they're valuable because they exist, not because they produce. It's what the world looks like when people live by gold principles in a silver economy, when they choose grace over greed, community over competition, being over doing. Can it actually work? Can grace sustain a society?" "It's the only thing that can," Marcus said. "Silver economies always collapse, always, because they're built on scarcity and fear. But gold economics, covenant economics, those endure, because they're built on the truth that abundance comes from blessing, not hoarding, that wealth multiplies when shared, that the 30% you can't measure is what enables the 70% you can." James nodded slowly. "I canceled the Federal Reserve meeting last night, before I knew you knew. I just couldn't do it. Couldn't turn you into a commodity." "Thank you," Marcus said. "And that took courage." "It took faith," James corrected. "That you were more than what I could explain." They stood in the library, surrounded by books of law and precedent and accumulated human wisdom. And Marcus said softly, "The law is the 70, James. It's necessary. It's good. It measures what can be measured. But it can never create the 30, never create grace, never account for the unmeasurable worth of a human soul. That's why I came, not to abolish the law, but to fulfill it, to show what it points toward, but can never reach on its own." "How do I help?" James asked. "What do I do?" "What you've been doing," Marcus said. "Document, testify, bear witness, and when the time comes, when I'm gone, tell them what you saw, what you learned, what it meant to follow someone you couldn't fully explain." "Gone?" James felt panic rising. "Where are you going?" Marcus smiled sadly. "The same place I went last time, into the darkness that thinks it can extinguish light, into the systems that think they can erase grace, into death that thinks it can defeat life." "No," James said. "Not again, not this time." "Every time," Marcus said gently. "That's what love does. It descends. It enters the darkness. It chooses the cross, because that's the only way to prove that grace is stronger than death, that light endures, that nothing, not sin, not suffering, not even the grave, can separate you from love." James felt tears streaming down his face again. "I don't want you to die." "I know," Marcus said. "Neither did Peter, neither did John, neither did Mary, but they learned what you're learning now, that death isn't the end. It's the doorway, the passage from one form of presence to another." "When?" James whispered. "Soon," Marcus said. "The Empire has noticed me. They're trying to decide how to respond, and when they can't absorb me, they'll try to erase me, just like before." "Then we'll protect you. We'll—" "No," Marcus interrupted firmly. "You'll let it happen, because it has to happen. The pattern has to complete. Death has to do its worst, so resurrection can demonstrate that worse isn't enough." James shook his head. I can't just watch you die." "Yes, you can," Marcus said, "because you've already seen me live, and that life, that testimony, will sustain you through the death, will remind you that the tomb is never the final word." They stood in silence for a long moment. Then Marcus embraced James. "Thank you for seeing me, for believing before you fully understood, for documenting the witness even when it cost you certainty.
I love you, James said. I don't know what else to say.
That's enough, Marcus said. Love is always enough. When they separated, James saw something in Marcus's eyes he'd never seen before. Peace, not resignation, not acceptance of defeat, but the peace of someone who knows exactly who they are and why they're here and what comes next. The peace of gold that knows silver can't ultimately touch it. The peace of grace that knows debt can never finally claim it. The peace of resurrection life that knows death is just transition. Marcus walked out of the library. James watched him go and knew, felt it in his bones, that the next time he saw Marcus, everything would be different. The revelation had been given. The witnesses had been gathered. The pattern was repeating, and the kingdom was coming. Not from above, but from within. Not through power, but through presence. Not by conquering, but by being conquered, and rising anyway.